Welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem, and with me, well, a good friend of mine, but also best-selling author of Separation of Church and Hate, I'm going to get this right, a sane's person guide to taking back the Bible. I hope I get the whole damn title right. From fundamentalist fascists and flock fleecing frauds.
Very good, Mr. Karem. Very nice.
John Fugelsang. John, it's a pleasure to see you, brother. How you been?
Morning. Wow, you say the title brilliantly. The next one's going to have even more alliteration. I write these just for you.
Well, thank you. You don't have to bear false witness on my account.
No, I know that. I bear false witness to everyone on my own time. It's okay. But I'm just auditioning for a job in this administration. That's all. That's the only reason I do it.
No shit, because that's where we're all about. So I thought of you. I did think of you on Monday, and I had to get your opinion on this because I want to go back to. I'm going to quote you because this is one of my favorite quotes of a book in recent memory. Jesus was a peaceful, radically nonviolent revolutionary who wasn't American, never spoke English, who hung around lepers, hookers, and crooks, never sought tax cuts for rich Nazarenes, was anti-wealth, anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer, never asked lepers for a copay, never called poor people lazy, never even slightly anti-gay, never mentioned abortion, supported paying taxes, was a long-haired community organizing, authority questioning, anti-slut shaming, brown skinned Palestinian, unarmed homeless Jew. But only if you believe what's actually in the Bible. Brilliant. I want to thank you for that every day.
Thank you. Thank you. That's only if you believe the Bible, though. You don't have to believe that. That's just what the Bible tells us.
Well, according to Pete Hegseth, the Bible tells us that we have to kill and show no mercy to our enemies. The president, and he said that this week, and closed on Tuesday a briefing in the Pentagon with an amen.
Yeah.
On Monday, we had a surprise visit from the presidential PEP secretary. She shows up maybe once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. And the last two times she's shown up have been last minute, no news provided. But in both cases, and especially on Monday, talked about how could you hear us praying before we came out of here?
She really wanted us to know that, didn't she? She wanted everyone to know that they had been praying, because that's what communion with God is, making the whole room know that you were just communing with God. That's what it's all about, Brian. Sorry, go on.
No, and has posted those prayers on TikTok and came out and came out and said in the briefing that you can negotiate with us or we'll kill you, while wearing a cross around her neck.
Yes. So she's on brand, you're saying. She's consistent.
So the floor is yours, sir. Is this Christianity?
No, this is not. This is fake Christianity. And that's been the thing that's been afflicting true Christianity ever since Jesus's operation was co-opted and absorbed by the empire that killed him 1,700 years ago. 1,700 years of Christian nationalist bullshit. And the actual Christ followers who resist this authoritarian nonsense are usually smeared as woke. And Caroline Leavitt really is a great figurehead for not just the whole White House, this entire brand of MAGA Christianity, which is to say, she goes behind a shiny gold cross to take a dump on the Gospels. She gets behind a shiny gold cross to defecate all over the actual words of Jesus. Now, what we're witnessing here is something new in American life. A defense secretary hosting a Christian worship service, not praying for peace or restraint or wisdom, but praying for overwhelming violence of action against those who deserve no mercy. He's invoking Jesus to say no mercy. This is not Sermon on the Mount. This is Call of Duty Galilee, brah. And this is the revoltingly fake Christianity that has always been a problem. You know, Jesus says in Matthew 6:5, don't trust the people who pray in public to be seen. Right. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Caroline Leavitt would post a video of her praying on TikTok. This goes way beyond the Constitution. The Constitution's already clear. No, they already hate the Constitution, right? No establishment of religion. It doesn't say no establishment unless a complete douche defense secretary is really into it. These people don't practice religion, Mr. Karem. They deploy it like a
Yes.
weapon.
Well,
This Hegseth has prayed for bullets to hit human beings. He quoted psalms about killing enemies. He's all into the Crusader imagery with white supremacist tattoos like Deus Vult. This guy does not like Jesus. He likes the Crusades. He likes the people who called themselves Christians and slaughtered Muslims, Jews, and pagans while dressed like characters from Monty Python and the Holy Grail waiting for a rabbit to come kill them all.
now you bring up an interesting point because there are those in the Middle East, and I've talked to my sources in the Middle East who believe that it is a purposeful attempt to engage the U.S. in a holy war against Muslims in Iran. Now, whether or not it is, the fact that some see it that way is disconcerting to me. You?
For some, that's what it is. I mean, again, the only thing these people hate more than the Bill of Rights are the actual teachings of Jesus. This is right-wing Christianity. They don't follow Jesus. They use him. That's how it's always been. They don't fight for the teachings of Christ. They don't fight for the Lord. They don't fight against Satan. They really don't care about religious freedom. What they care about, Mr. Karem, is conservative Christian control over society and culture and government. That's it. Their religion is power and being better than you. They do not like the teachings of Jesus because the teachings of Jesus negate everything they stand for. So they'll use the guy as a symbol. And this is why you don't need to believe in any part of the Bible as absolute literal fact. You don't have to believe in Jesus' divinity to use the scriptures against these frauds, because the media is never going to call them out and the Democratic Party is never going to call them out. It's going to be to the rest of us to show the world that Christianity is not a system of hate.
Well, to that point, both you and I were raised Catholic. You far more than I, but I was an altar boy, and I remember the hymns when I was younger, based on Scripture, and I always go back to Matthew 25:40, which
That's it.
was, whatsoever you do to the least of my brother, that you do unto me. That was the hymn associated with it,
Yeah,
and
it's a
I
great
look
hymn.
at it, yeah, and I look at what we're going through now, and the mercy, there is no mercy, and you have, to your point, Pete Hegseth saying we should show no mercy. You have Caroline Levitt saying that this country was founded on Judeo-Christian ethics, an
Yeah.
absolute falsehood and
Complete
lie.
lie. Complete lie. Yeah, completely. I mean, the founders were very thorough about this, and like Jesus, they wrote it down more than once. I mean, in the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, that they established they wanted a wall between church and state long before we had a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. The first Congress voted to not let Christianity be our official religion, and the Treaty of Tripoli, started by George Washington, signed by John Adams, states the government of the United States is in no way founded upon the Christian religion. This new nation knew that for trade to be able to grow economically, they'd have to be secular so they could do business with all different types of people, including the Muslims, or Mussulmen as they were called then, of the Barbary Coast. That's who the Treaty of Tripoli was written for. Again, George Washington started it, John Adams finished it. The government is not based on the Christian religion. And nothing these Christians do is based on Christ. You mentioned Matthew 25. I would say that there's really two great pieces of scripture that people need to know that are in a constant tug of war between the revoltingly fake Christians of MAGA and the actual Jesus followers. And I think we have to call these people fake Christians. Because
Yeah.
when you don't call them fake Christians, what you're doing is grouping all Christians together and saying Martin Luther King is in the same bucket as the Confederates and Hitler
Or Pete
and
Hegseth.
Columbus or Pete Hegseth. Exactly. It's not fair to the decent, nice Christians that we've all known. So there's two verses, right, that everyone should know, and it explains everything. One is Jesus in Matthew 25, and one is Paul's letter to the Romans chapter 13.
Yes.
Just last week, we saw this happen when Pope Leo came out and cited Matthew 25 to protest the Trump administration's treatment of migrants. That's where Jesus, on the night he's arrested, right, he gets together with his guys and he tells them what's going to happen at the end of the world. He describes this apocalyptic scene where he is going to gather all the individuals and nations one day and judge them. And he's going to judge them based on a very specific set of criteria. Jesus says he's going to judge individuals and nations by how they cared for the poor, cared for the sick, welcomed the stranger, and were kind to those in prison. Right? This is where he says, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was hungry and you gave me some food. I was sick and you cared for me. And they say, Lord, when did we do this for you? And he goes, when you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. A very famous passage.
Yes.
But it's Jesus saying what it takes to be a Christian nation. It's Jesus weighing in on politics on a policy level, saying that his fake followers are the ones who call themselves Christians, individuals and nations, that don't care for the poor, don't care for the sick, don't welcome the stranger, and don't care for those in prison. He says you're going to hell based on whether you welcome the stranger or not. So Leo quotes this, and the next day the press goes up to America's creepiest youth pastor, Mike Johnson, and says, hey, the Pope said this yesterday. And Mike Johnson got very annoyed that they would bother him with this, these little insects called journalists. And he said, well, I would direct you to the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans, chapter 13, where he says, respect the governing authorities. These are the two verses you need. Matthew 25 and Romans 13. Romans 13 is where Paul, not Jesus, that's important. They don't follow Jesus. They don't like Jesus.
Yeah.
They got to go around Jesus. You want to be a homophobe? Jesus won't let you do that. Sermon on the Mount forbids homophobia. So they got to go back to Leviticus or forward to one of Paul. They got to go around Jesus. And Paul's their only New Testament reach around. And Paul, it should be pointed out, was Jesus's PR guy. He was not, in fact, Jesus. Paul's teachings...
Didn't even know Jesus.
He never knew Jesus. The famous story is he was a persecutor of Christians, yeah. Saul of Tarsus, complete dick. Murders Christians, bounty hunter. He's going to Damascus to pick on more Christians. He's
9-5.
Struck blind by a blinding light, and then he hears Jesus' voice, or he thinks it's Jesus' voice. Those two never met, and there were no recordings back then, but he's pretty sure it's Jesus' voice saying, Saul, why do you persecute me? And the story is that he becomes Paul, and because he's a Roman citizen and a Pharisee, he can go through the Roman Empire and preach this gospel of Jesus all throughout the empire to the pagans, whereas Jesus' actual apostles are still busy getting murdered by Paul's old friends back home. So Paul is setting up
there for a second.
Yeah, please.
There is a line in that's Acts 9:5 when he's on his way to Damascus to slaughter Christians because everybody's got to have a hobby, and he falls.
He loved his work. He was really good at it.
He was good at it, and so he goes. The blinding flash, and he says, who art thou? And he goes, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Now rise and go into Damascus. And that's in the King. And I used to use that for barbats. And in fact, I got an interview. I walked into it was South Carolina Sheriff's Office when I was with America's Most Wanted. He had this huge copy of the Bible on his desk. And he wouldn't do an interview with me because he said, no graven images. And I said, well, if I can show you a place in the Bible where Jesus calls his enemies a bunch of pricks, will you do it? And he goes, it's not there. I know it back and forth. I saw the version of the Bible he had us to go to Acts 9:5. And so every day I remember Acts 9:5 that you just quoted.
Awesome.
Go ahead. Sorry, I had to say that.
Oh, no. So Paul sets up the religion, right? And
yes,
he's
he
the
is
guy.
the religion.
He's the religion. I mean, the religion we have for Christianity, for good or for bad, is Paul's version, because the other apostles all got killed. Paul writes a lot of letters to all these fledgling churches and gives them advice on how to get set up and how to not get killed by the Romans, okay? Because Paul violated the Romans plenty. Paul saying that Jesus was a king, right there, that's sedition. Like, Paul did not respect the governing authorities in that sense, but he wrote to the Roman church, and he's like, hey, I don't want you guys to all get killed, so you got to just play it safe. Respect the governing authorities. Don't cause any problems. God put him in charge, so go ahead and respect him. That one line has been used for over 1,000 years by right-wing jerk-offs who don't want to follow Jesus' teachings about how we should treat each other to say that you have to be obedient to authoritarian power. Brian, the Confederates used this line. The British loyalists in the American Revolution used this line. The Nazis used Romans 13. You must submit to the governing authorities. Mike Johnson used the favorite verse of the slavers and Nazis last week, again to out-Bible the Pope and to essentially say, well, Jesus says this, but his flunky he never met says this. So this is all you need to know. And the most important part about it is, and this is what they never tell the MAGA guys, number one, they only quote Romans 13 when the president has an R after his name, right? When Joe Biden was president, you never heard them talk about respect the governing authority. Barack Obama, they never said God put the governing authorities in charge. As soon as the president has an R after their name, they flip it, and this becomes the talking point again. And it will be the talking point until January 20th of 2029, right? So they're full of crap. They don't really mean it. They just use it as a get out of Jesus card. And the thing to know is, Paul didn't respect the governing authorities. But you know what happened to the guy who told the Roman Church, the guy they're quoting? Paul was arrested, beaten, thrown in jail, and beheaded. This is the part they never tell MAGA. They'll tell MAGA the Bible said, the Apostle Paul says respect the governing authorities. They don't tell MAGA that respecting the governing authorities got Paul killed.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to take a short break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about what's happened in the last 24 hours in the world of MAGA and churches. So stick around. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back. It's Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem. With me, well, like I said, good friend, best-selling author John Fugelsang. We were talking about his book. We had talked about before this, before we started recording, was what's happened in the last 24 hours with Donald Trump showing up at the Supreme Court. It's a historic first for a president to show up at the Supreme Court and wants to get rid of birthright citizenship, thought he would show up and intimidate the Supreme Court. And at the same time, Chief Justice John Roberts apparently took it to his Solicitor General and said he was having none of it. What the hell are you talking about? This is a really strange way to argue against birthright citizenship. But you had a take on it that I love. And so it's all yours.
On the birthright citizenship, I mean,
on Donald Trump being there.
Well, just think about the intimidation factor, right? How mob boss is this?
Yes.
Like Donald Trump wants them to tinker with the 14th Amendment, right? He wants to get rid of the 14th Amendment, which was created not to be racist. It was created as a response to racism, literally. It was created to guarantee that states couldn't make citizenship race-based. And what's driving all of this is the fact that white people are going to be a minority in this country in 2045. That's what's driving all of this. And in Trump's case, it's driving that he just thinks if he gets enough brown people to not be citizens anymore, that somehow it'll help him. But he shows up like a mob boss to intimidate them, and I'm like he's bringing Frankie Pentangeli's brother from Godfather 2. This committee owes an apology, Senator. It's just hilarious, his attempts to intimidate them, and it's not going to work, and it's deeply, deeply pathetic, but it's also deeply ahistorical. These guys just can't stand what the actual Bible says, and I'm sorry, they just can't stand in this case what the actual Constitution says.
Yes.
And that's all it's about. I mean, birthright citizenship is enshrined in the Constitution. The only way you can change it is with an amendment, and they're never going to get 60% of Congress to do this. So what they're doing that's hilarious is they're going and quoting dead Confederates to the Supreme Court this week. Donald Trump's lawyers have been citing long-dead Confederates and long-dead white supremacists who argued in the 1800s that Chinese people were barbarians and they should never be granted citizenship. Literally, it's like, Your Honor, I'd like to call my first expert witness a dead white supremacist. And that's who they're citing to try to get rid of birthright citizenship. Not just racists now, racists that were told they were wrong 200 years ago in this country.
And here we are, again, arguing the same thing over and over again. Tonight, we're expected to see him talk about his method of getting out of the Iranian war. But if Donald Trump says it's over with, right, doesn't necessarily mean it is. I think he set this country up for a string of terroristic activities for the next generation. He's recruited new terrorists with his cruelty to Iran. And I'm not defending the far extreme religious sect of Iran. I'm just saying there's consequences to the action.
No, it's this. Look, it's the extreme right wing of all religions causing all the problems.
Yeah.
I mean, no one can talk about this, but it's not the liberal and moderate Muslims, Jews, and Christians causing all this violence. The liberal and moderate Muslims, Jews, and Christians are actually getting along just fine all over the world, being groovy, forming families, going to school together, forming businesses, working side by side, not being dicks, trying to raise their kids and make it a better world. It is the fundamentalist, extreme conservatives of every religion that cause all the problems. This is what our atheist friends get wrong. When the atheists say religion's responsible for all the homophobia and oppression of women and violence, it's like, no, man, no, I get why you think that, but it's the fundamentalist wings of all the religions doing this. And so, yeah, the Ayatollahs are in power because another Republican president wanted to do regime change in Iran. And no one talks about this either. But in 1953,
yes.
President Eisenhower, the last Republican president to balance a budget with a surplus, it's been 70 years, guys. But Eisenhower was also, like Trump, the first president with no experience in government. He had experience in military service. But they didn't like that Iran elected a president who thought the oil belonged to all of them and wanted to nationalize the oil fields so it would improve the lives of everybody. That made a few people in Texas very upset because that oil belongs to rich people.
And
so
Britain.
So along with Britain, with the MI5 and the CIA, we had a coup. We ousted their president Mossadegh. We installed the Shah as our puppet. And the Shah was their Hitler. He was a dictator and a murderer, and he slaughtered people and raped people. And when he finally left, we helped him escape, and they hated us so much that the religious kooks took over, and we've been dealing with this ever since, and Republicans don't want you to know that anything ever happened in Iran before 1979 in the hostage crisis. But this is all happening because another Republican president did regime change in Iran because Americans wanted that oil.
But Donald Trump?
73 years this is happening, and we're seeing the same thing now, a Republican president doing regime change in Iran because greedy Americans want that oil. And other reasons. There's child rape to be distracted from. But, so this is happening because of us. And ironically, we've seen all these amazing, inspiring protests against the Ayatollahs in the last 17 years. Over 50% of Iran's population is under age 50. They're a young country. Technology is there. The religious kooks can't keep this racket going forever. And we've seen the protesters come so close. In 2009, so many times they've come so close. And now we've probably guaranteed that these rat bastard Ayatollahs are going to be in power for at least another generation. They have consolidated their power so hard because you have all of these folks who want to depose them, but now the Americans are the ones bombing schools and killing little kids.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Jesus, our leaders are the only leaders we got. And their leaders have been preparing for this for a long time. And they are showing us, as the Viet Cong once did, how asymmetric warfare can never be predicted by dumb people. And, they don't have to win. They just have to not lose.
Yeah,
and that's why you see Marco Rubio's already changed all the terms for what winning looks like. 2 weeks ago, winning was regime change, and Trump gets to pick the winner and a full and unconditional surrender. And now Marco's saying, let the oil flow again. I mean,
and Donald says he's already affected regime change by killing the top leaders. It's still the same regime, just different leaders.
Oh, yes. Khamenei Jr. Still Ayatollah Khamenei, but a different one. That's almost like spending trillions of dollars in Afghanistan for 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, isn't it, Brian?
Well,
we're not good at this, man. We're not good at this.
And the idea that they're preaching regime change while it's all about oil. But let me drop that and go to, because we could do that for hours. It angers me so much, having been in the Middle East on several occasions. The fact that we still don't get it is annoying to me. And I have made the point, it goes back to 53 as well. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is, I want to remind everyone that we had a deal with him not to make
We had a peace deal.
We broke the deal.
And it wasn't just Obama. Many countries worked on it for a long time.
and then we obliterated their ability to make a nuclear weapon. And then 6 months later, we had to obliterate it again because they were 2 weeks away from perfecting a nuclear weapon that they hadn't been able to perfect in 60 years. So
Well,
it's
that's
all
Netanyahu, right? Netanyahu's
yeah,
been telling us they're 2 years away for
yeah,
22 years.
yeah. So yeah, well, yeah, and there's another crook we could talk about, but at the end
Yes,
of
he
the
is.
day, Donald Trump today said he's thinking of getting out of NATO because NATO wouldn't come to our aid in Iran. Now, I remind everyone NATO is a defensive alliance. It was there to prevent hegemony of the Soviet Union and Russia. So there's not going to be anybody any happier about us getting out of NATO than the soy boy, Vladimir Putin.
I would also remind everyone that NATO came to our aid after 9/11 because
Yes,
that's the terms of NATO, not to help us commit war crimes against countries that didn't start anything. NATO does not want any part of that. They are there to defend us in a defense alliance, as you said. Yeah, I mean, of course he did this because Vladimir Putin has always wanted him to do this. And again, like I'm not saying he's a plant by Vladimir Putin. I just ask people, what would a
doesn't
Vladimir Putin
matter.
plant do differently? Because
Yeah.
Putin wants to dismantle NATO. It's been his goal all along.
Those who argue that he's a plant of Vladimir Putin, I agree, miss the point. The point isn't whether or not he's a paid actor. What matters is the actions that he takes, and the actions that he takes are in direct contradiction to the very values of NATO and our Constitution. So I guess I'll close out this half hour before we leave and ask you, what do you see in the future? Or do you still have, as a good Christian, I always look, I'm a lapsed Catholic myself, but I still believe in a higher power and hope. Do you have any hope
Yeah,
for the future?
I
And
have.
what
Oh,
is
I have so much hope for the future. Absolutely. I mean, um, not so much economically, to be honest with you. I
yeah, I
don't
don't
think we're
either.
getting it. I think 45 years of trickle down economics and working class people still haven't realized that the billionaires aren't their friends. I'm not optimistic in that sense about restoring the middle class. I think it's going to have to get a lot worse before it gets better. Um, but I have so much. I mean, I'm not an optimist. I'm a recovering cynic. And what I
Do you
always
have to
say
go to
is,
12-step meetings for that?
no, I go to 12-step meetings for imposter syndrome. Um, but it's awkward. I only go because all my friends have imposter syndrome, and I want to be like them, but I don't really have it, so it's awkward because I'm sitting in these meetings pretending I have imposter syndrome, and I'm so terrified they're going to know I'm faking just because I want to be part of the gang. But that's
There's a
that's
10-minute bit right there.
that's a matter for my therapist. That's not what this show's about. Yeah, here's why I'm a recovering cynic. If you had told me in the '90s that we would have had marriage equality, a black president, and we wouldn't be throwing people in jail for cannabis. If you had told me this in the late 90s, within 30 years, within 25, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have believed that Americans were capable of such decency and such moral a black president, this country, letting gay people have the same rights to marry who they love, not putting people in jail for a flower that's grown here since long before white folks showed up. No, we're not good enough for that. And look at how much good we are. There's so much good out there, and I have so much faith, Brian, in the moral and intellectual backlash of Gen Z and millennials to all of this Trumpism, which is really just the shittiest warmed over parts of 20th century white supremacy come back for one last jump scare in this century. That's in the horror movie when they finally kill the monster and the kids finally relax and then the monster rises one last time and the shy girl from the library has the gun and she kills him and that's what this is. Donald
I
Trump
agree with
is
that.
the monster of 20th century white supremacy showing up and roaring one last time before it's finally finished off for good. Young people have grown up with Muslim classmates, with gay classmates, with Latino classmates. This kind of hate is not going to work for the next generation. It'll work for some. God knows they're training these young white Christians to be as bigoted as they can be. And
Yes.
these transgender children are a threat to all of us, so we got to make their lives a lot harder to be good. We got to drive their suicide rate up to be good Christians. But overall, I don't think that young people are going to go for this, and I am so here for the backlash to this shitty 20th century white supremacy vibe.
I agree with all that except for the 20th century. To me, it harkens back to the 19th century, but
Sure, I'm just talking about 1950s.
yeah,
I'm talking about, the
1920s.
the kind of clan that raised Donald Trump.
Yes, and
Because
I
his father was arrested at a Klan riot in Queens, New York in 1927.
yes, and I go back to the reason why I have hope is because now I have children and grandchildren, and I remember a time, honestly, in the 70s, and maybe you do too. It was after Nixon had left and before Reagan came in office. We all wore the same shitty wide ties. We were all wearing platform soles, and even even white people had afros, and we were all listening to the same music. We were everyday people, and I thought there was a brief moment during the Carter years where I thought everything was going to be okay, and I still have hopes for that for my kids and my grandchildren. So that's where I
I,
am with
I
hope.
love that. I mean, I wasn't born yet when Nixon was sworn in, but I do remember
Ugh.
how depressing it was in the Carter era. Jimmy Carter was my first experience seeing a moral Democrat used as a human punching bag and
Yeah.
seemingly unable to fight back. And tragically, it's been something I've seen replicated quite a bit by other moral Democrats in the past several years.
Don't let, and then the lesson there is don't let the Republicans frame the argument because when they do, they make you the enemy all the time.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
what,
but I think Jimmy Carter had no way to be prepared for it. I
yeah.
kind of think Joe Biden should have been more prepared for it after what he saw Bill Clinton and Barack Obama go through.
Well, I maintain that Biden was a pretty good president.
The first 2 years of Biden were the
Yeah.
best president of my life.
Yeah.
Biden's first 2 years are the best president of my lifetime.
But now everyone wants to blame his, more well his mental decline, but I think having been close to that, the real problem was the people that he chose to be around him were not that good, and so I think that his communication
In
staff
some
was
cases,
yeah
I'll tell you my crazy theory. I know you have to break, but I don't mental decline. I mean, my God, I saw him do that NATO press conference for NATO's
yes
anniversary. And I thought, that's a guy in his 80s. He's really old. He's lost a step, and holy crap, what a grasp of the issues he has.
yes
My,
still
you know,
does
my my theory always was, it's not
what
very popular, that Biden had long COVID. I think Biden had. I think someday we'll learn that Joe Biden had long COVID, and he may have already had undiagnosed cancer as well, and that affected his performance. Because I watched that press conference. Joe Biden has greater grasp of knowledge than most 40-year-olds. Listen to the guy talk about climate change, and he's
yeah
astonishing. But I will say, the man I saw at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2022 was not the same man I saw at the Democratic Convention in 2024.
I will too, yeah, I
And
agree with that,
I've always thought that, because Biden had COVID, what, 3 times? I've
yeah
always thought he had long COVID, because I had long COVID for like 8 months and I could barely function. It brought back my mono from years ago. I was getting fevers every day. I was groggy. I had constant brain fog. And we still haven't really had an honest conversation nationally about what long COVID was or the effects of long COVID. And it's tragic because these idiots who wanted to lie about public health measures were never asked to address it. I'll always think that that's what was going on with Biden. And I also
you're not
think,
the only one. There are
I
those who
think
have
Joe
said that.
Biden, yeah, I think he really believed as well that he was the only person who could have beaten Donald Trump. Um, I
Well,
think he really believed it. And I
I
also think that Kamala Harris doesn't get enough credit at all for getting more. She was in the race for 100 days, and she got more votes than Reagan got both times, than Clinton got both times, than Obama got both times. After only 100 days in a race, a mixed race woman against the most famous man in the world. It's astonishing how well she did, and it's tragic that we had this many gullible white people. Because look how we're
well
paying
and
for it. Look how
gullible.
we're paying for it.
Look, but it wasn't just gullible white people. The voters didn't turn out for her that turned out for Biden, and there were black males who did not vote for her.
I hear this a lot, and can I
Well,
just
that's the
say,
stats. Yeah, but
yeah, I know, but it's like what is it like? Like, it's less than 15% of black men. I mean, 85% of black men still voted
and while
Democratic,
Donald Trump says he won by a landslide, that
and he,
15% would have made a difference, I
but
think.
right, you're right, because he only won by 1.1%. But this
Yeah.
is this media narrative that black people went for Trump. It's
No, no,
rubbish.
no. That's I'm not saying
Black
that.
women certainly did not go for Trump. Black women were 97% to Democrats. The two most loyal voting blocs in America are black women and black men, and that
Yeah.
wasn't changed in the 2024
No.
election. What I always thought, Mr. Karam, was just that. In 2020, everybody voted because everybody was trapped in the house during a pandemic. We were all addicted to the news all day. We were all very engaged. We all got our mail ballots. We all had more options to vote because they had drop off boxes. It was a lot easier to vote in 2020. There were more options to vote in 2020, and that's why Democratic turnout was higher. When it's easy to vote with many options, Democrats do well, and that's why you see them trying to restrict the vote in so many charming ways.
Agreed.
Which brings us back to why Trump's at the Supreme Court this week.
Today. And I will end it with this. I have always said that I see the No Kings rallies. I empathize and sympathize with them, but I cannot tell you the number of times I've interviewed people at the No Kings rallies and I ask if they have voted, and the answer is no.
I get it.
And that's the problem. This country, we believe that 60% voter turnout is a good voter turnout.
Yes.
And that's wrong. That's bad thinking.
But this is why Democrats have to embrace this and say it should be extremely easy for any American to exercise this right. You should be able to vote by mail so easily. It should be a national holiday. It should be early voting. You know why Election Day is the first Tuesday in November? Do you know why? You know why that's the day?
Go ahead. I do, but you go ahead.
Because way back in the founding, we were an agrarian economy, and you were tending to your fields until fall, until the end of October. You were planting and making sure your stuff was ready for the winter, and then you'd have to go to church on Sunday, right? And at the end of October, and then you'd have to travel by horse for one full day so you could vote on the first Tuesday in November. Sunday you had to go to church. Monday you had to travel by horse so you could vote on Tuesday. We are literally having our elections controlled by farmers who've been dead for 200 years. And it's part of the white supremacy racket this country's always had. It should be incredibly easy for people to exercise that vote. It should be a national holiday. But again, the Republicans, they say they hate government. They don't hate government. They love government. They hate democracy. That's what they hate.
And they hate us being involved in government. And by the way, Donald Trump, despite whatever he says, loves mail-in voting. He did it himself.
He can't stop lying.
Asked about that, he defended the very reasons why we have mail-in voting. And he listed all the reasons why we have mail-in voting, and then said, "Yeah, I have a right to do it. I'm the president of the United States." Well, I have a right to do it because I'm a registered voter in the United States.
This is the aristocracy. It's their country. They own it. They believe this in their bones that they own the country.
George Carlin.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So again, like it should be a holiday. It should be much easier to vote. And we saw what happened in 2020. But the reality is, since 1992, women have overwhelmingly voted for Democrats.
Yeah.
And the Republican response to that is not, how can we expand our appeal to make women want to vote for us? The Republican response is, how can we pass a law that makes it a lot harder for women to vote if they got married or divorced or widowed and had to change their name? And that's what we're seeing play out right now. They're trying to make it harder for citizens to, and there's no problem with illegal voting. There's no problem with voter impersonation. The fact that Democrats are still punching bags like John Kerry on this issue, like Jimmy Carter on this issue, Democrats are piñatas. Name one election, you rat bastards, that's ever been swayed by voter impersonation. It doesn't exist. It's all a lie.
Voter fraud is a lie, because if there had been voter fraud in the election that Donald Trump lost, tell me how come the Republicans did so damn well. All of them except
Donald Trump still says that 3 million illegal aliens voted in 2016 for Hillary Clinton, and that's why he lost the popular vote. And we just allow this lie to hang in the air, Donald Trump's flatulence. I mean, it's like they can't stop lying, and they know that they're not popular in a democracy. So instead of doing things to make them more popular, they want to make it harder for people to do democracy. Yeah. That's the racket. We got to call it out all the time.
Well, with that said, we've come to the end of the show, but I will say this, that you had talked about the hope and how you can buy weed now and
not go to jail for weed now. Not go to jail for weed.
Yeah, not go to jail for weed. I'll say this. I'll go back to Bill Hicks. Not only do I think that weed should be legal, but for especially people in government, I think it should be mandatory. There you go.
I agree.
Well, that said, I want to thank you for joining us. This is Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem. Thanks, John. Anything you want to plug, brother?
My book is called Separation of Church and Hate. I host the primetime programming on Sirius XM's Progress Channel every evening at 1:27. And yes, I have a Substack. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you. And your show is great. I always listen to it. This is
Thanks,
Just
sir.
Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem, and we'll catch you next time.